In the United States, a murder goes unsolved every 37 minutes. It's a chilling statistic, one that reminds us of the fragility of life and the enduring pain of unanswered questions. For one family in Washington state, that agonizing uncertainty became the reality for decades after their daughter, Sarah Yarborough, was brutally murdered in 1991.
Sarah's story begins like so many others, filled with the vibrancy and promise of youth. Picture this. It's Friday the 13th, December 1991.
Oof, Friday the 13th.
A typical night for a 16-year-old girl, parents out of town, a friend staying over, and the weekend stretching before her full of possibility.
I can almost hear the laughter, the excitement of those carefree teenage plans. It's a scene that probably resonates with many of us, evoking memories of our own youth. And that makes the tragedy that unfolded all the more heartbreaking.
Yeah, on Saturday morning, Sarah's life was tragically cut short. Her body was found just 100 yards from her car in the Federal Way High School parking lot, partially clothed with a ligature around her neck. It was a scene that sent shockwaves through the community.
We're deep diving into Sarah's case today, using eyewitness accounts, archival news reports, and even insights from the forensic genetic genealogist who ultimately helped crack the case. But this story goes beyond just the whodunit. It's about the enduring power of hope, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the ripple effects of a single tragic event that touched the lives of so many.
From the beginning, the case seemed like it should have been quickly solved. Eyewitnesses came forward, a composite sketch of the suspect was circulated, and there was even DNA evidence, a relatively new tool in 1991.
You'd think with all that, the police would have had their man in no time. But years passed and the case went cold.
The impact on the community was profound. Imagine living with the knowledge that a killer might still be among you. It created an undercurrent of fear and suspicion that permeated daily life.
It wasn't just a feeling. The sources describe how the sketches of the suspect were everywhere, in shop windows, on community bulletin boards. It was a constant chilling reminder of the unsolved crime.
And for Sarah's family and friends, the pain was amplified by the lack of answers. Imagine her younger brothers growing up under the shadow of their sister's unsolved murder. It's a weight that's hard to even comprehend.
And her best friend Shannon, who was supposed to be at Sarah's house that night, but had to cancel at the last minute. The what-ifs and the guilt must have been unbearable.
There's a particularly poignant detail about a memorial bench that was created for Sarah. It was spearheaded by Bill Fuller, a close family friend.
The bench bears the inscription, Carpe Diem, seize the day, a phrase that takes on a whole new meaning in the context of Sarah's stolen future.
It's a reminder of the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. The bench is adorned with some of Sarah's personal items. Ballet shoes, a replica of her beloved dog books. It's a testament to her vibrant spirit and the void left behind.
So after years of dead ends, what finally led to a breakthrough in the case? It was a relatively new technology at the time. Forensic genetic genealogy. It's like DNA profiling taken to a whole new level.
Colleen Fitzpatrick, a pioneer in the field, used this technique to trace the killer's family tree through DNA databases. And it led her to an unexpected name. Bill Fuller, the very same family friend who had helped create the memorial bench.
That's incredible. The irony is almost too much to bear. Was he the one?
Naturally, everyone was stunned, but Fuller willingly provided a DNA sample and it didn't match. It was a relief, but also a setback.
Back to square one then.
Not quite. Fitzpatrick and her team are nothing if not persistent. They continued to dig into the Fuller family tree, and their efforts revealed two distant cousins, Edward and Patrick Nicholas.
And one of them was our guy.
Initially, the focus was on Edward. He was a registered sex offender, which raised immediate red flags, but his DNA wasn't a match either. Then the investigation shifted to his brother Patrick. He was a bit of a recluse, living a quiet life, not far from Federal Way. To get his DNA, investigators had to resort to some rather unconventional methods.
Sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. What did they do?
They placed Patrick under surveillance, hoping to collect a discarded DNA sample. Finally, their opportunity arose. They observed him flicking a cigarette butt at a laundromat. It was a seemingly insignificant piece of trash, but it held the potential to unlock the mystery that had haunted so many for decades.
It's amazing how something so small can have such huge implications. And the DNA matched.
It was a perfect match. After more than 20 years of waiting, Sarah's family finally had their answer. But as you'll see, this was just the beginning of another chapter 1 filled with even more unsettling revelations.
It's almost unfathomable to think that for over 2 decades, Patrick Nicholas lived among them, seemingly an ordinary man, while carrying the weight of this horrific secret.
And the most disturbing part is that Sarah's murder wasn't an isolated incident. The investigation into Patrick Nicholas revealed a deeply troubling past, a pattern of violence against women.
You're referring to the attack on Ann Croney 8 years prior to Sarah's murder.
Exactly. The details of both cases are eerily similar. In both instances, Nicholas targeted women near their cars, engaged in seemingly harmless conversations, and then brandishing a knife forced them to comply with his demands.
The sources describe how Anne narrowly escaped with her life, having to jump into the Columbia River to get away from him. That must have been absolutely terrifying.
It's a chilling testament to his brutality. And what makes it even more disturbing is that Nicholas was convicted of attempted rape, in Anne's case, and sentenced to 10 years. But he was released after serving only 3.5.
Wait, so if he had served his full sentence, he would have still been behind bars when Sarah was murdered? It's a horrifying thought knowing that her death could have been prevented.
It raises a lot of difficult questions about the justice system and the balance between rehabilitation and public safety. In this case, the consequences of early release were devastating.
It's hard not to feel anger knowing that Sarah might still be alive if things had been different. The sources mention another unsettling detail from Nicholas's interrogation. When detectives told him they were investigating Sarah's murder, he asked what year it was.
That seemingly innocuous question sent a chill down the spines of investigators. Why would he ask that unless there were other victims during those unaccounted for years? It's a haunting question that may never be fully answered.
So after more than 30 years, the day of reckoning finally arrived. What was the prosecution's strategy going into the trial?
With Nicholas's prior criminal history deemed inadmissible, they had to build their case primarily around the DNA evidence. They presented the jury with the overwhelming statistics, a 1 in 120 quadrillion chance that the DNA found on Sarah's clothing belonged to anyone other than Patrick Nicholas.
Those are some astronomical odds. But the defense still attempted to challenge the use of forensic genetic genealogy, didn't they?
Yes, arguing that it was a new and untested technology. They questioned the reliability of the technique and tried to suggest that it wasn't robust enough to warrant a conviction.
Did they have any other lines of defense?
They attempted to downplay the significance of other evidence found at Nicholas's home, such as a newspaper clipping about Sarah's case and a torn photograph of a woman in a cheerleading outfit. But ultimately, the DNA evidence was incredibly powerful.
The trial must have been incredibly emotional, especially for Sarah's family and friends.
There was a particularly poignant moment when Sarah's belongings were presented as evidence. Her drill team jacket, her shoes, her stockings, they were tangible reminders of the life that had been so brutally cut short. The silence in the courtroom was palpable.
I can only imagine the weight of that moment, seeing those everyday items transformed into symbols of loss and grief. What was the verdict?
After deliberating for a little over a day, the jury returned with a split verdict. Patrick Nicholas was found not guilty of premeditated murder, but guilty of both first-degree and second-degree murder with sexual motivation.
A split verdict. What was the reaction like in the courtroom?
It was a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that he was finally being held accountable for his actions, but frustration that the verdict didn't fully encompass the gravity of his crimes. The sentencing hearing provided a powerful platform for those impacted by Nicholas's actions to finally have their voices heard.
I understand that Anne Croney, who had carried the weight of her own trauma for so long, delivered a particularly impactful statement.
She stood face to face with the man who had tried to take her life and spoke about the lasting impact of that experience. She also challenged the justice system, reminding everyone that its failures had allowed Nicholas to continue preying on women.
It must have been incredibly cathartic for her to finally confront him and reclaim her voice. What about Sarah's loved ones?
They spoke about their profound grief, the unimaginable pain of losing Sarah, and the years of agonizing uncertainty they had endured. They talked about her stolen future, the milestones missed, and the ripple effects of this senseless act that would forever alter their lives.
The judge seemed particularly moved by their testimonies, especially those that emphasized Sarah's youth and vulnerability.
Yes, Judge Josephine Wiggs didn't shy away from expressing her outrage at the senselessness of the crime. She acknowledged the profound impact on everyone involved and the need for accountability.
What was the final sentence?
Patrick Nicholas was sentenced to almost 46 years. It was a significant sentence, but for many it felt inadequate, considering the years he had already spent free and the potential for other victims during that time.
It's a bittersweet ending to a case that spanned decades. Justice was served, but it came at an immeasurable cost. And it raises some important questions about the systems we rely on to protect us.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Sarah's case highlights a critical gap in law enforcement: the restricted use of familial DNA searching in Washington state. This technique allows investigators to compare an unknown DNA sample against profiles in the CODIS database, potentially identifying relatives of the perpetrator.
So in this case, they could have potentially found Patrick Nicholas much earlier because his brother's DNA was already in the system.
Precisely. The technology was there, but the legal framework wasn't. Many other states, including California, New York, and Florida, have successfully implemented familial DNA searching, and it's been instrumental in solving countless cold cases.
It seems like a no-brainer then. Why not expand its use everywhere?
Well, it's not quite that simple. As with any powerful tool, there are ethical considerations. Some argue that familial DNA searching infringes on privacy rights, potentially implicating individuals who haven't committed any crimes.
That's a valid concern. It's a delicate balance between solving crimes and safeguarding individual liberties.
Exactly. And it's a conversation we need to have as a society. How do we maximize the benefits of this technology while minimizing the risks? What safeguards should be in place to ensure its responsible use?
Sarah's case sparked a movement in Washington to expand the use of familial DNA searches. It's a legacy that could prevent future tragedies and offer hope to families still waiting for answers.
And beyond the policy implications, there's a deeply human element to this story. For those directly impacted Sarah's family, her friends, Drew Miller, the young man who discovered her body, the trial and verdict, brought a sense of closure, but also a renewed appreciation for the power of community and shared grief.
They found healing through connection, supporting each other through the darkest of times. It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, hope and resilience can prevail.
That's a beautiful sentiment and a fitting note to end on.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many other cases are out there, just waiting for that one piece of the puzzle to fall into place. It's both hopeful and heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah, that's the duality of forensic genetic genealogy. It offers a powerful tool for solving cold cases, bringing closure to families who have waited decades for answers. But it also underscores the tragic reality that some of these crimes might have been prevented if the technology had been available sooner.
We've talked about the potential benefits of expanding familial DNA searches, but you mentioned there are also ethical concerns. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure, some people argue that searching through DNA databases for familial matches could infringe on the privacy rights of individuals who haven't committed any crimes. They worry about a slippery slope where this technology could be used for purposes beyond criminal justice.
I can see how that would be a concern. Imagine being linked to a crime simply because you share some DNA with a distant relative. It raises some complex questions about guilt by association and the potential for misuse.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations and establish clear guidelines for the use of this technology. It's a powerful tool, but it needs to be wielded responsibly.
It sounds like there's no easy answer. We need to find a way to balance the potential benefits of solving crimes with the need to protect individual rights.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Each case needs to be carefully considered, weighing the potential benefits against the potential risks.
Sarah's case has certainly brought this debate to the forefront in Washington state. It sparked a movement to reevaluate the restrictions on familial DNA searching, and it's a conversation that's happening across the country.
And it's not just about policy changes, it's about education and awareness. The more we understand about this technology, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions about its use.
So what can our listeners do if they want to learn more or get involved in this conversation?
Well, there are some excellent resources available online. The Innocence Project, for example, has a wealth of information about forensic science and its role in the criminal justice system. You can also reach out to your local representatives and let them know where you stand on this issue.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of criminal justice. Our voices matter.
Absolutely. And that's what this deep dive has been all about, encouraging critical thinking, sparking conversations, and empowering listeners to engage with these complex issues.
Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the deeply human element of this story. It's easy to get caught up in the legal and technological aspects of the case, but at its heart, this is a story about people.
You're right. For Sarah's family, her friends Drew Miller, the young man who found her body, their lives were irrevocably altered by this tragedy. And while the trial and verdict brought a sense of closure, the scars of that loss will always remain.
The sources describe how they found solace and strength in each other, creating a community of support and shared grief. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human connection can be a powerful source of healing.
That's a beautiful sentiment and a fitting note to end on.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the heartbreaking details of Sarah's murder to the groundbreaking technology that ultimately led to her killer's capture. But I think the most important takeaway is this. Sarah's story is a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, hope and resilience can prevail. and that the pursuit of justice, though often long and arduous, is a fight worth fighting.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's left you with some food for thought and a renewed appreciation for the complexities of the world we live in.